All right, good morning, everyone. Grateful that you could all make it out today with us. My name is Ben Bryce. I'm a special advisor to the director. Here on my right is Director Bushatsky, and to my left is Natalie Mass, the AMA director. And this is the most recent of our ongoing informal stakeholder process about an ag to urban proposal. Right off the bat, this should be old news to all of you who've been with us throughout this process, but it's getting more and more popular. So for the folks who are maybe tuning in for the first time, just note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast live and will be available on our dedicated Ag to Urban webpage, and that webpage is here on the slide. We do hope to keep things relatively informal, so please feel empowered to raise your hand if you need clarification throughout the process, though we will have a dedicated discussion stage for more detailed comments or questions. Just raise your hand and let us know, including those folks online, and we've got technical folks who will make sure that we are aware of you and can turn the time over to you. When speaking, please speak clearly into the microphone, and for the folks here in the room, we'll make sure to get one to you. And if you have technical issues, you can call the DWR help desk number 602-771-8444 or email tickets@azwater.gov, and we'll help you get taken care of. So what we're going to talk about today, we'll give you an update on just a few changes to the dedicated webpage. Then the majority of today's conversation will be where we walk through our proposal within the context of the feedback that we received from stakeholders. Then we'll turn to areas of consensus and places where there are different views that we've heard from stakeholders, and then we'll end with next steps. Updates to the webpage. They're really not that significant, but it will look different. We've made some non-substantive formatting changes to help direct folks. There was some difficulty finding sometimes how to get to the dashboard, things like that. So the layout will look different, but all the information is the same. You will see an update later today when this presentation, when we have the recording from today's presentation, we'll upload that, as well as the comments that we received from stakeholders on the draft presentation that we gave 2 weeks ago. So you'll be able to find that before the end of the day today. And with that, we'll move to stakeholder feedback. As you know, we requested feedback on a draft proposal that we gave on February 26th. We were pleased to have received numerous comments on that draft, and especially pleased at the generally favorable response. You made us feel pretty good that we received. Naturally, however, some comments did request some changes. We'll talk about that a little today. But it's gratifying to see our work together is helping us to move towards consensus, and there are some important areas of consensus that we've found. We are getting strong support for important elements of the program. I also want to specifically thank the folks who did provide comments. And we want to make sure that you all see the ones that we have in case someone out there sent a comment that I somehow missed. If your name's not on here, please let me know, and we will make sure to evaluate those comments and to make sure that we also upload those to the website so that everyone has the benefit of the feedback that you have to share. I'll also note that these letters here on the right side of the screen are just an illustrative example. There are more comments than just those, and you will be able to find those online. Today, when we walk through the comments, we're going to give a general overview of the themes that we found, but if you do want to fully understand and appreciate the nuances of each individual stakeholder's comments, of course, we'd invite you to read those comments yourself. And with that, we'll walk through the feedback. So we'll start with general structure. As we announced 2 weeks ago, eligible applicants would be able to voluntarily relinquish a right to withdraw groundwater under an irrigation grandfathered right within the Pinal or Phoenix active management areas in exchange for a physical availability conservation credit. These credits would be able to be applied to a showing of physical availability for water to be recovered outside of the area of impact or for groundwater, and there would be no new groundwater right created. with those credits. We received favorable feedback on these points with just one exception. One comment letter that we received requested that the Tucson AMA be included in this proposal. I'll note that some other comments supported limiting the program to just the Phoenix or Pinal AMAs. So we'll talk about where we are right now. There are some important reasons why we didn't include the Tucson AMA or any others at this point. First, the Tucson AMA is not facing the issues of unmet demand that the Phoenix and Tucson AMAs are. That means that ag to urban conversion can already happen. It's the same idea with areas that already have issued certificates of assured water supply. We don't have the physical availability standing as a stop to that kind of development. Second, as you've seen throughout this process, there are important differences between the two AMAs that we've talked about in Phoenix and Pinal, and that's why the data indicates that conversion rates for each AMA ought to be different. We have not had the time to examine that data as it applies to Tucson, and we would need to do that before we could set any specific conversion rate if a Tucson program were to be implemented. But I will note that this does not stop our ability to leverage a successful ag to urban program in an AMA where that's needed. But for now, our analysis continues to focus on the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs. We talked about what credits would do. First, under the draft program, IGFRs on eligible lands could be exchanged for physical availability conservation credits, and these credits would be applied towards meeting physical availability and would not create new grandfathered rights. That means all existing rules about withdrawals would continue to apply. On this issue of grandfathered rights, we received comments that supported this approach and none that opposed it. So we feel confident in this element. Because of this, all other elements of the Assured Water Supply Program would also continue to apply, and by that we mean continuous and legal availability, water quality, financial capability, and consistency with the management goal and plan. We also received favorable comments on that element as well, with the exception of replenishment, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So on replenishment, we've said it a lot. I'm going to say it again. I hope that we're all coming to a common understanding here. The department's proposal would not change how replenishment works. 100% of the groundwater that would be used would need to be made consistent with the management goal under existing rules and procedures. That means that when you use groundwater, you either have to replenish it, use a groundwater allowance, use extinguishment credits, or a combination of those three. A lot of comments supported this. There was one comment that suggested that only 50% of water withdrawn needed to be made consistent with the management goal. They also suggested that there be an increased conversion rate. And another comment suggested an indexed conversion rate to replenishment. It's crucial to the department's proposal that all groundwater use be consistent with the management goal. That means we leave the replenishment rules as they currently exist. I want to talk about the difference between 50% replenishment and 50% consistency with the management goal. When we show 50% replenishment on the dashboard and the other replenishment rates, those illustrate a potential replenishment expectation. It is not the same as requiring 50% consistency with the management goal. So when one comment suggested that the dashboard shows significant groundwater savings with only 50% of the groundwater being required to be made consistent with the management goal, that is not what we are indicating in the dashboard. Remember, when we show 50% or any other replenishment rate on the dashboard, this is with the understanding that 100% of groundwater used, needs to be made consistent with the management goal. Let me show you what I mean. Here we have two graphs showing a hypothetical, not real, totally made up situation for a not real provider in a single year. In each case, a fictional provider has a combination of extinguishment credits and groundwater allowance that it can use to achieve consistency with the management goal under the current rules, or at least on the left under the current rules. If you want to skip right to the punchline, that means that the dark blue section is the amount, or sections is the amount of water that would be replenished. Remember, you have to either replenish the groundwater, use extinguishment credits, or groundwater allowance. On the left side, you have a hypothetical provider who has enough groundwater allowance and extinguishment credits to cover 50% of its groundwater use, meaning that it only needs to replenish the other 50% in order to be 100% consistent with the management goal. 100% consistent, but in this case, only replenishing 50% because it can use groundwater allowance and extinguishment credits to cover the other 50%. I hope this is just a review for nearly everyone here. On the right side, we see a fictional scenario where hypothetically only 50% of groundwater use would need to be made consistent with the management goal. In that scenario, we have per se groundwater mining for 50% of the groundwater used. That's the red section in the graph on the right. Right off the bat, no matter what you do with the other 50%, the 50% that is not made to be consistent with the management goal is going to be groundwater mining. Now, the other 50% doesn't mean that it will necessarily be replenished, because that provider may also have other extinguishment credits and groundwater allowances that they could apply. So in this hypothetical scenario, only 25% is being replenished, even showing 50% consistency with the management goal. So we want to be super clear that if when you look at the dashboard and you click on those replenishment rates, you understand that we are not saying that 50% consistency with the management goal would save a certain amount of water, or 2/3 or 1/3 or any other replenishment rate that you choose. Rather, what we are saying is that assuming 100% consistency with the management goal, only certain percentages are actually replenished. That's the amount of groundwater savings we hope to achieve. I know I'm hammering on this pretty hard, but we want to be absolutely clear with everyone what we're talking about when we show different replenishment rates on the dashboard, but maintain and continue to maintain that our program would require 100% consistency with the management goal, and that doesn't change in our proposal. A few more comments on replenishment. One commenter noted the importance of understanding the impact that the program would have on CAGRID. This is absolutely crucial, and so we've been grateful that that CAGRID has been participating in these informal stakeholder meetings. Another comment suggested that replenishment should occur where pumping occurs, and another suggested that increased competition for water supplies will make it difficult to get water with which CAGRID or any provider that has to replenish would be able to replenish. So we are evaluating that feedback. On the topic of the Buckeye waterlogged area, in our presentation of the draft outline, we showed that water withdrawn in the Buckeye waterlogged area would be considered consistent with the management goal under the terms of existing rules, and that ADWR would periodically review the waterlogged area conditions and the application of this provision. This is an example where 100% consistency of the management goal would not require 100% replenishment, right? The only comments that we received on this provision were supportive, so we feel confident that we are reaching consensus on this. I will note that one comment did have questions about how an ag to urban program would work under ARS, or along with ARS section 45.576.10, which is a new provision that's been added by the legislature, and we're considering that. Moving on to program mechanics. We walked through a lot of details here in the draft proposal and didn't receive any comments that opposed how those would work. Don't see the need to walk through all of those again, but we feel like we are getting to a point where we are at least certain about how this program could work and that stakeholders seem to agree. On the sunset review, you'll recall that our proposal included a sunset review where the ability to issue new credits would last for 10 years. I'll note that that would come with an option to extend, and that issued credits already issued, would not expire at the 10 years, just the department's ability to issue more. We included this because we felt it important to evaluate the Ag to Urban program's success to make sure that it was realizing the benefits and water savings that we expect. Many commenters explicitly supported this element, and we did not receive any comments that opposed it. So we feel confident that a sunset review makes sense for our program. On the extent of eligibility, you'll remember that we said that eligibility would be determined on an acre-by-acre basis. That means that the full extent of an IGFR would not necessarily be determined to be eligible unless each acre within that IGFR meets the eligibility test. And we'll walk through what that test is on the next slide. But under our proposal, if only a portion of the acres included in an IGFR meet the test, then only that portion would be eligible. Some comments supported this element, and we didn't get any comments that opposed it. So again, we feel like we are reaching consensus on how this element would work as well. The specifics of the eligibility test, you'll recall that to be eligible to participate in the program, our proposal stated that you must be located in the Phoenix or Pinal AMAs. Of course, we talked about the request that Tucson be added. It must have been irrigated with groundwater in 3 of the last 5 years prior to replenishment. And we included within this water used by a groundwater savings facility, in lieu water, I mean to say. The IGFR must not have a negative flex account balance, must be up to date on annual reports verified by DWR for the prior 5 years, and must be compliant with relevant conservation requirements. There must be no existing certificate of assured water supply on those acres, although we noted that IGFRs that lie within the service area of the designated provider would continue to be eligible, and that IGFRs would be required to pass a model review. Comments were supportive of the 3 out of 5 year irrigation requirement. While we have heard in the past that a different test ought to apply, we received no comments indicating that here. So we feel confident that we're moving towards consensus on a 3 out of 5 year irrigation requirement. One comment did specifically call out the importance of ensuring no negative flex account balance, up-to-date annual reports, and compliance with conservation requirements. We didn't get any comments that opposed that. And I do want to note for clarity that while we did receive requests that certificates be allowed to participate in the program, we didn't get any requests saying that an overlying certificate shouldn't render an IGFR ineligible to participate, or acres of land ineligible to participate. So we feel like we've reached consensus on that point as well, that if lands have an overlying certificate of assured water supply, they would not be eligible under the program. For all of these reasons, we feel confident that the eligibility test is a place where stakeholders seem to agree. I do also want to note one specific comment that we received. We received a comment from the Gila River Indian community indicating that some lands that the department had included as eligible would pump Gila River subflow. The community asserts that these lands would therefore be ineligible to participate in the program. I want to acknowledge that we received that comment and we are evaluating it. And we're not going to take any position today on how we would interpret that comment or whether we would make any changes, but we felt it important to acknowledge that specifically. The last element of the land eligibility test was the model review. You'll recall in our proposal that we stated that the model review would evaluate the 100-year depth to water in the cell where pumping occurs. We also noted, that we would continue to develop this element. Commenters supported the concept of a model review. Some comments emphasized that the program should protect stored water supplies and physical availability, And another commenter specifically requested that pumping associated with credits under the program should occur on or close to the converted lands to maximize the benefits of reduced agricultural pumping. We will continue to develop this element, so we are not quite ready to come out with all of the details here, but we feel confident that there is a consensus in the importance of the model review. Now we get to some places where not everyone sees eye to eye necessarily, unsurprisingly. Comments diverged on the issue of whether to allow credits to be pledged to certificates of assured water supply. Our proposal, as you'll remember, limited the pledging of credits only to designations. Many comments explicitly supported this. Some comments, however, encouraged the department to allow credits to be pledged to certificates. One comment suggested that pledging certificates be allowed in cases where a relevant provider submits a notice of intent to apply, or excuse me, I should say, agrees to apply to ADAWS with a certificate holder within 5 years of the notice of intent to serve. After reviewing these comments, the department remains confident in limiting this program to designations. First, because designations assure water supply for current and projected uses within their area, are incentivized to seek and obtain alternative supplies, are able often to control effluent, and create an even playing field for all uses within their service area. For credit quantification, in our draft outline, we propose that credits be issued in a lump sum, not in an annually reoccurring amount. This was very important to us. The amount would be quantified by multiplying the number of eligible acres by the relevant conversion rate and multiplying that product by 100, a single lump sum issued. Consistent with this, we set AMA-specific conversion rates of 1 acre-foot per eligible acre in the Phoenix AMA and 0.7 acre-feet per eligible acre in the Pinal AMA. Various comments supported the concept of a single lump sum, and we did not receive any comments opposing this. So we feel confident in this particular element, that this is the right approach. Some comments supported our proposed conversion rates specifically. I think my favorite said that we were doing this thoughtfully, which has certainly been the intent. However, some suggested an increased conversion rate to incentivize greater participation, and one comment suggested that a greater conversion rate was needed to provide more water for commercial, industrial, and manufacturing uses. I'll also note that we did receive a comment suggesting that the conversion rates were too high. Another comment suggested that perhaps a total cap on credits that could be issued under the program could be necessary. We're evaluating these suggestions, so for now we are not increasing or decreasing the proposed conversion rates. On to service area rights. As we've indicated in past meetings, the draft program does not change a designated provider's ability to use water under their service area rights. Additionally, the proposal would require a designated provider to include retired lands into their service area. This makes sure that new water uses on retired lands are served by the designated provider and replenished using groundwater. We didn't receive any comments that opposed this. I will note that should the issue of certificates come up, it brings with it questions about portability, and we understand that. And that's one of the reasons why limiting to designations makes so much sense. But within the context of designated providers, we did not receive any opposition to our proposal about service area rights. Conservation measures. In our draft outline, we propose that development on ag to urban acres must reflect the reality of constrained water supplies, which means that ag to urban providers would need to demonstrate the following, that the following requirements be met on ag to urban retired lands. First, we proposed to prohibit non-functional turf. I'll clarify today that non-functional turf would be limited to community use in schools, parks, and cemeteries. We propose prohibiting evaporative cooling in new commercial development and upon replacement in existing commercial development. requiring new builds to use the IAPMO's Uniform Plumbing Code, Appendix M, and requiring EPA WaterSense. And I'll clarify that by saying that that means requiring a new single-family home to be EPA WaterSense certified and requiring EPA WaterSense labeled fixtures, appliances, and devices in both new builds and upon replacement in multi-housing, commercial, industrial, and institutional facilities. This would also include prohibiting water parks. I should say WaterSense does not include this, but our prohibitions, our proposal would include prohibiting water parks, lakes, ponds, and decorative water features. We did receive one comment on this element, suggesting that there should be an exemption for lakes under 5 acres that are filled with effluent, either directly or recovered effluent. We're considering that comment, but have made no changes at this point. Other comments that we received that don't fit neatly into our structure, but are worth noting. Comments spoke favorably about the concept of proper guardrails. One comment specifically noted that rooftops cannot be fallowed, which is one of the reasons we are trying to approach this so thoughtfully, recognizing that you can't unring that bell. 2 commenters opined that the purpose of an ag-to-urban program ought to be to incentivize agricultural land development over development of desert lands. One comment specifically noted that the Buckeye area agricultural lands ought to be treated differently. And that's certainly part of the idea behind an ag-to-urban program, to move from agricultural uses, high water use agricultural uses, to lower water use urban uses. Various comments noted with concern that decreased Colorado River water deliveries would result in greater draws on groundwater supplies, although one comment also indicated that an ag-to-urban program would be a benefit on this issue because of increased groundwater savings. Another comment noted some thoughts on the agricultural attrition rate that is built into the dashboard. We'll also note that other stakeholders have given us feedback on this element, and so we are considering those comments. One comment noted some changes that may be needed in the department's maps, which we are examining, and various comments acknowledge their participation in similar conversations happening at the legislature, which we note. We are evaluating these comments, and we're not ready to announce any changes at this point. So, where is their disagreement? Stakeholder feedback indicates differing viewpoints in 4 areas. Whether to include the Tucson AMA, whether to require groundwater use associated with credits to be 100% consistent with the management goal, the specific conversion rates, and whether to extend the program to certificates. These are not small things, but I think it is very important to recognize the areas of consensus where if I can go even further, perhaps unanimity, although I'm thoughtful about whether folks may have additional comments after today. But we see consensus in support for the program generally, in the inclusion of the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs. And by that, I mean that no one is opposed to including those. We do note that there are requests for Tucson. The proposed general structure, the way that the program application would work, and the nature of credits, the ability to pledge credits to designations. And by that, I don't mean to suggest that there's consensus about whether certificates ought to be involved, but nobody is opposed, that we have heard, to allowing these to be pledged to designations. The replenishment exemption to the Buckeye waterlogged area, the sunset review, the importance of the model review, the quantification method in a lump sum, and eligibility review on an acre-by-acre basis, requiring 3 out of 5 years of irrigation and no overlying certificates. We feel like this is pretty significant, that at this point, what we've really narrowed down are just a few places of disagreement, but an overall consensus on the broad elements of a program. With that, I'll note that we did see an additional comment come in after our deadline, which we were quickly able to assess, but we expect that there may be additional thoughts after today's meeting, either right now in person or that you may want to submit. And so we'd like to offer that as an additional opportunity to clarify your comments if you feel like we have misconstrued them here or lacked an appreciation of what you were trying to communicate, or if you feel like there's anything else that needs to be said. So with that, we'll open this up to conversation and discussion if there's anything else that stakeholders want to make us aware of. Yeah, Dan, we'll get you a mic right now.
Fun. Okay. Hi. Sorry. This is Dan Jones. I'm representing Pinal County Agriculture. Apologize. We did not get comments in by your deadline. I just wanted to note, sorry about your consensus slide there, but on the last bullet there about our 3 to 5 year use requirement and analyzing eligibility acre by acre, we don't agree with either of those points. We still have concerns about the 3 to 5 year use requirement. And don't believe that it has a water management benefit. We also have real issues with the acre by acre analysis of eligibility for the program. We understand in some cases why that might make sense, but overall, we think that we are exercising the irrigation rights even if we aren't irrigating every single acre. And it shouldn't matter which part within the footprint of the IGFR was actually irrigated in a single year if we're going to retire it and convert it. We may end up with having stranded parts of IGFRs that still have an IGFR because they can't be retired and converted in this case. And when you're talking about the irrigation districts like Maricopa Stanfield, Central Arizona, San Carlos, New Magma, those little stranded pieces are going to get an irrigation district allotment of water until we know that the IGFR has been retired. So we are still going to use that water, even if we don't irrigate those specific acres, if we retire 80% of an IGFR. So that's not going to realize the water saving benefit you might think by having part of an IGFR become a subdivision and part of it just become nothing, because we're still going to allot the water that goes to those acres to farmers, and they're going to use it somewhere else. So we will follow up with some written comments. Just wanted to make that, make sure that we get on the record there.
Understood. Thanks, Dan.
Hey, your Gonzaga Bulldogs won last night. You should be happy. Still not work? Oh, all right. Your Gonzaga Bulldogs won last night, so you should be happy, Russell. Dave Roberts on behalf of Buckeye Water Conservation and Drainage District and the Roosevelt Irrigation District. At least one of your commenters suggested that if you were going to limit this to designations, that some changes needed to be made to the ADOS rules to accommodate a few things that are really specific to ag to urban areas. And I did not see any of that in your slides today. And so I wanted to make sure you didn't overlook that piece of it. I know that you talked about the rules being done and dusted, or dusted and done, or whatever you used the term last time. But I think if you want to be successful in an ag to urban program and require providers to pursue the ADOS approach, in order for it to be successful, you're going to need to give them some relief with respect to replenishment requirements and being able to put that water to use. Buckeye has got a lot of challenges with respect to even using the groundwater out there. It's going to cost a lot of money to do that. And they need some relief on some of this stuff. So in my comments, I talked about some of those changes. So I'm hoping you will consider those as part of this.
Thanks, Dave. And yes, we did notice those. We didn't walk through those today since this effort does not encompass changes to ADOS, but we did note that, and I probably should have noted that on our slide. All right, we've got 3 folks with their hands raised online, and then I see Alex. Yeah, Great. Nick, could you work through the list of folks online, and then we'll come to Alex here in the room? Thanks.
Mr. Emerson, you're unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Great, thank you very much. Chase Emerson on behalf of Emerson Holdings would like to comment that in the Phoenix AMA, the proposed 1 acre-foot conversion rate is insufficient for typical new medium density single family communities. It would result in having to acquire additional water rights in order to obtain sufficient credits above that 1 acre-foot conversion rate. And that would be cost prohibitive and also detrimental to affordable housing, another one of the administration's policy goals. I know the legislature has bills that advocate for a 2 acre-foot conversion rate. And my comment would be to propose a 1.5 acre-foot conversion rate in the Phoenix AMA, which would be sufficient for new medium density single family home communities with the applicable water conservation measures outlined earlier. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thanks, Chase.
Mr. Dunham, you are unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Doug Dunham, AppCore Water. Appreciate all the work the department's putting into this and look forward to moving this toward some sort of workable program. I will note I failed to submit anything in writing, but I will follow this comment up with written comments. But they are centered on the relative authorities that a private water utility has versus a city that has. Cities have the zoning authority, permitting authority, building permits, etc. So in the conservation requirements, there's the ability for a city or town to enforce those requirements where a private utility does not. I mean, we certainly don't have any way to inspect a building to make sure that, when they're being constructed, they're using X type of fixtures, retrofitting in commercial buildings. We have no insight into that. Some of the land use restrictions might be able to be taken care of with CCNR type of restrictions. But some of the other elements that you've outlined are strictly outside any existing authority for a private utility. So would encourage the department to think about how, while it's a laudable goal, it's probably not going to be anything that a private utility can enforce. So maybe need to make some adjustments there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Mr. Anderson, you are unmuted. You can go ahead and ask your question.
So, as with a couple of the other comments you just heard, on behalf of Home Builders Association of Central Arizona, we have not gotten our written comments in yet. And so apologies for that. We'll follow up with something in writing. You correctly noted that we continue to have a disagreement about whether to include certificates. I think it's important to note that inclusion of certificates is one of the ways to get housing moving faster. And that if we don't include certificates, we've heard from both Queen Creek and Buckeye that it's going to take them a while to get into the program, to get some of the water sources that they need to utilize into the program. And so it's going to take a while. I did want to make just a very general comment about consensus. I would say that we've had a number of issues, and I'm having trouble remembering exactly which ones, but we've had a number of issues where we've made a comment in an earlier meeting, and we made it again at a secondary meeting, and then we made it again at a third meeting. And simply because people stop making the comment that isn't responded to, that doesn't mean we've reached a consensus. I think Dan Jones's comment about the 305 and the eligibility is an example of that. So saying there, I would just say to the public generally that saying that there's consensus, don't jump to the conclusion that there's consensus simply because people have gotten worn out in making the comment. The final point is with regard to the conservation requirements. We think that conservation requirements are an important aspect of this. But there is, we made this comment verbally to the department, and I think it'll take a little bit more work to get to the bottom of it, which is the application of the uniform. I'm going to get this wrong because I'm not ready on this comment, but the plumbing code requirements vary by jurisdiction, and getting that right in these rules, we need to get a little more thought into that to get it done correctly. So that's it. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you, Rob. All right, I think now, Nick, if we could get a mic for Alex. Oh, perfect. You already got one.
Here, but so I
Let go.
Now let go.
Let go.
all right. Thank you. So I am here on behalf of Harvard Investments and Cowley Companies. And we did not submit written comments, but I wanted to make 3 comments. And the first one, maybe if you could go back to the slide with the pie charts for replenishment. I just wanted to talk about that. Right. So I think there might be a different way to look at this. And, since the 90s, we've had, if you retire an irrigation grandfathered right, you could get an extinguishment credit. And then that extinguishment credit could be used to reduce your replenishment obligation. And then it also, reduced the replenishment obligation that the CAGRD would have to meet. That program ended December 31st, 2024. So now, if you retire an irrigation grandfathered right, you can't get an extinguishment credit. And so if this program were to include a reduced replenishment obligation, it would essentially be working like an extinguishment credit. So it would be incorporating an extinguishment credit concept into this physical availability credit concept. And it would have the result of recognizing that you are retiring irrigated land. And so some portion of that, it might make sense that to determine that some portion of that is consistent with the management goal. And, whether it's 50% is the right number or not, I can't say, but it, I think that because you could get extinguishment credits in the past and you can't now, it's recognizing that there should be some kind of extinguishment credit or consistency with the management goal portion to this. And that also would, reduce the obligation for CAGRD. So I just want the department to consider that as, since the extinguishment credit program has ended, that it might make sense to incorporate something like that into this program. Okay, and then my second point is just about the conversion rate. And, I know we've had a lot of discussion on this. The 1 acre-foot per acre in Phoenix and 0.7 in Pinal, as one of the commenters noted, won't be enough to allow the subdivision to, to proceed. So they'll have to find an alternative water supply in general. When we're looking at certificates of assured water supply, I know that's, outside of designated provider, but they're in the range of 2 acre-feet per acre. using the department's demand calculator, which it seems it should be reasonable to be able to rely on that. But also the cities rely on that. And if you look at the water master plans for some of the cities, they have it in there that, for example, City of Goodyear, for a medium density, you have to, the developer has to bring 1.79 acre feet per acre. For high density, I think it's over 2, it's like 2.14 or something like that. So what this will do if we have it at 1 and 0.7 is it'll mean that for one subdivision, they will have to obtain an alternative water supply to meet the conversion rate. In addition, they're going to have to essentially obtain an alternative water supply through the CAGRD to pay for that. And then if you're talking about that it's in an ADOS area, they're also going to have to contribute to obtaining an alternative water supply to qualify for the provider to qualify for ADOS. So you're essentially, for that same subdivision to move forward, they're going to have to obtain alternative water supplies 3 times. And that is a significant burden and a significant cost. So one of the concerns is that if we are worried about affordable housing, you know, how that cost is ultimately going to be passed on to the customer. And in areas like Buckeye, if you look in their general plan, it shows that currently it is, you know, or in the past, it has been one of the more affordable communities. So in their general plan, it says the ratio between income and housing cost is 2.6. So housing costs are 2.6 times the average income. And if you compare that to Maricopa County, it's 3.5. So that's just based on their general plan. And the concern is, you know, if the obstacles are too great and the costs are too great to make this work, it is going to have an impact on housing costs. So yes, we do need to obtain alternative water supplies. And I think there's a recognition of that. And we don't want to be fully dependent on groundwater, but finding what's the right number, what's the right balance to be struck is something I think that, you know, that further conversation needs to be had on that issue. And then lastly, in terms of, does this just apply to a designated provider's service area, or should this apply for certificates? You know, I think all of these areas, Buckeye, Queen Creek, want to be designated, but there's some pretty significant obstacles to get there and pretty significant cost. And so if we want this incentive to kind of be able to work right away and reduce the groundwater pumping from ag, which at least in the West Valley, it's often, well, in the Phoenix AMA, the average is 4.8 acre feet per acre. And in the West Valley, a lot of them are 6 or 7 acre feet per acre. And that pumping will continue until this land can qualify for some, you know, alternative use. So if we want this incentive to work now, then I think we have to consider including certificates. And I think that if one of the purposes of this is to address the moratorium on development that has occurred in areas that are not designated providers. It has to apply in those areas. So currently, if you're in a designated provider's service area, you can still develop. And so if we're trying to solve that problem, if we're trying to address the problem of the moratorium on development, it has to apply in the areas that can't move forward with development. So I would encourage the department to consider this, applying this program to certificates at least for some amount of time, at least for a transitional amount of time. And that's it.
Thank you, Alex. And your points are well taken. I think the only thing that I want to make sure I touch on, your others make total sense, just on how we're thinking about 100% consistency with the management goal. The reason I'm hitting this so hard, because I do recognize your comparison to extinguishment credits. I think that I understand that point. I just want to be very clear about what the dashboard shows, right? Because what we've seen is folks indicate that a certain percentage used in the dashboard indicates water savings when only that percentage is required to be made consistent with the management goal. And so we want to be very clear that that is not what we're saying. But again, your point is well taken on the comparison to extinguishment credits. All right, Nick, I think we have someone online. Is that right?
Mr. Wilson, you're unmuted. You can go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to, I heard that there had been comment to include the Tucson AMA. And on behalf of Southern Arizona Water Users Association, I'd like to just support that comment, and that there are a number of smaller communities here that had historically planned on the use of an ag to urban type exchange of water, and they still are going to need something like that. So it would be very beneficial to the Tucson AMA as well as the Phoenix and Pinal AMA. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Yeah. Paul.
Paul Gardner, town of Queen Creek. We are probably 90% supportive or 95% supportive of everything that's been put on the screen. We just would like to talk about a couple things. We have about 2.5 years of platted lots that have certificates that are left in the pipeline to build on. On the Ag to Urban program, if it was adopted this year and those ag lands went forward, it would take them about 30 months to go through the process of preliminary plat, final plat, sold to a developer or home builder, start moving dirt, put all the utilities in, start to go vertical. And by the time you're 3 to 3.5 years out, you now have a use of water. So there's always a lag between when you start the process and then when the actual water happens. In 2026, we will lose 90% of our CAP allocation because of our priority with the NIA water. In the meantime, we're working very hard with the department. The department's working very hard with us on getting Harquahala to the finish line. And we're probably about 4 years out at worst case and 2.5 years out at best case to getting that water pledgeable to bring in to start offsetting future growth with hopefully another 5,000 acre feet behind that to be put in the same pipeline. So for a total of about 10,000 acre feet. The slide on the left, if we were to utilize that, it would show that CHERD would be quite benevolent and allow us to offset 50% of groundwater use with credits. Right now, we're able to offset anything after 2004 at only about 33%. 67% has to be reported. So we're hopeful the slide on the left works, because that helps us going forward, being able to use extinguishment credits or groundwater allowances. If our MSA with CHRD is a lower number, then less credits will be used and more water will have to be replenished. So that's a nice slide, and we hope it works. And then the last but not least, the reason why we've talked about if we decided as a community to use the ag to urban, then we would commit to be within a certain time frame enrolled in as a ADOS. And so that's the bridge we're looking for, is we don't want to commit into it until we have water that's able to be put into the canal and we're able to utilize it to offset this future growth. Because that actually becomes a demand. And then if we become an MSA, it's not just that water, but it's all the legacy pumping that we have to cover along the way. And again, depending on what we cut with CHERD, depending on how much water we have to offset, we have to have those water supplies immediately in the pipeline. So we're working on a lot of things. We just feel like we need some sort of a runway to be able to get there. And we could do some juggling. We could go ahead and pledge 8,000 acre feet of effluent that we've stored, which would equate to be 80 acre feet a year for 100 years. That would be our new water source, and then we could enter into ADOS. We just think that's a lot of gymnastics to try to be able to get there for 80 acre feet. And then last but not least, I know there's been a lot of talk over the last several months on people's GSFs or water that they have stored throughout the AMA. And I just want everybody to know that when you're looking at these different AMA maps and hydrology, if you were to picture a cake, every layer of water rights are taken into effect. So for example, if you have IGFRs, all the IGFRs in the valley have to be put down as a layer of cake. Those have to be reserved. If the Gila Indian River community has stored water, that water has to be reserved. If all the municipalities have all stored water in these different GSFs, all that water has to be reserved. What's left over is what water we could use in Queen Creek to use under this Ag to Urban program. So it's not like we get to go and say, oh, we have strategic wells, we're going to pump out everybody's GSFs. That water is preserved, always has been, always will be. Doesn't matter what happens in 2026, doesn't matter what happens in 2045. That water has always been reserved in all the groundwater models for all the communities that have ever stored water. We only get the leftovers. And then we have to replenish 100% of that over time. So those are what our comments on. We're very bullish on the Ag to Urban. We really want to get there. And if we had renewable supplies that we could pledge today, we would be there. And so that's why we've asked for, if we pull the trigger on Ag to Urban, then we're mandated to enter into ADOS under a certain time frame. And that was what our comment was. So that's just, we want to be clear on that. It wasn't just, oh, we get to do it and then we change your mind. There would be a real obligation with that.
Thanks, Paul. Your points are well taken. I want to really drive home one point. Because you said this seems great and we hope it works out. This does not, and I see I'll get there. This does not represent what we expect will happen for individual providers. At every stage, I hope we've been super consistent in saying that we propose no changes to how replenishment will be required to occur. That means no changes to the rules, and not that we could, no changes to existing MSAs. right? And so if there's a minimum reporting requirement that applies to a particular provider, nothing about this program would purport to change that. So the reason we used 50% in this example was because of the specific comment suggesting that 50% only need to be made consistent with the management goal. But this, I think I said fictional or fake at least 4 times when I first brought up this slide, and that was by design. This is only an illustrative example of how 50% replenishment and 50% consistency with the management goal are not necessarily the same. But other than that, I appreciate your comments. I just want to be super clear that the department is not suggesting that this would indicate any change in replenishment requirements or any change in existing MSAs. Yeah, go ahead. Simone.
Thanks. This is Simone Joles, Root City of Chandler. I think it might be helpful to clarify maybe where there might be a little misunderstanding on some of the comments about the concerns with making sure that this program doesn't put at risk underground storage, whether it be CAP water that's been stored underground or effluent stored underground or any of the different non-groundwater supplies that have been stored underground. I agree with Paul's comments. You can think of it like a layer of the cake, right? And what the assured water supply model does is it protects all those other things underground that are not groundwater. I think maybe where there's concern is that as the program stands right now, physical availability is what protects those layers, right? That's what the 100-year assured water supply model does, is it says, okay, there's all these layers of water that are underground. They're not all groundwater. And so we have to make sure that those are protected, that those are subtracted. The problem you run into is what this program is effectively doing. I mean, I think the beginning of this was a physical availability exemption credit. We're now calling it a conservation credit, but it's the same thing. It's basically saying, let's acknowledge here that we're not going to protect all of those layers of the cake. That's what this program does, is it says we're going to give a conservation credit because there isn't enough physical availability. So that's what starts to put those layers of the cake at risk from my perspective.
Dave, were you raising your hand or? Okay, got it. Got it. We'll start there. Yeah, go ahead. Right behind you. Oh, you have the mic? Oh, okay. Well, whoever's got the mic, go for it. Yeah. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, Dave Roberts again on behalf of Buckeye and Roosevelt Irrigation District. There are some groundwater that is protected. That's the groundwater allowances. They are protected. They are part of the supply. The AMWA cities have over 4.3 million acre feet of those groundwater allowances. So they are protected. Through this process, you still have to go through the model review. So you have to show that physically there's going to be that water for 100 years. It's not, and that will take into account, that model review will take into account all of those water sources that have been stored, whether it's the water bank water, whether it's long-term storage credits generated by municipal providers and others, and their groundwater allowances, all of that. I think if you look at some of the numbers, the AMWA cities have access to over 9 million acre feet of water underground that's protected. And so while there is a concern about Colorado River supplies and the loss of Colorado River supplies, it's not like we didn't know that coming. We planned for that way in advance by storing water underground and granting those huge groundwater allowances. So those supplies do not affect the unmet water demand, not one bit. So if you want to address the unmet groundwater demand here in the AMA, you need to have a workable ag to urban program, and you need a runway for these municipal providers, if they're going to be forced into designations, to be able to afford it. Just being able to put groundwater use is going to be very, very substantial, especially in the Buckeye area where you have high salinity wells anyway. So we're going to have to deal with that. My fear is that you're going to pass a rule that hardly anybody's going to take advantage of because it'll be so onerous to be able to afford to be able to use it. So that's my fear.
Got it. Thanks, Dave. And then we'll go to Jake and then Scott. But before we do, I do want to clarify after your comments, Simone, about what the purpose of the model review is to do, and you touched on it too, Dave. The way that we will be using the model review is to ensure that less water is used than would otherwise be under that existing IGFR. And so that is our intent in the way that we would protect physical availability. Now, we haven't rolled out all of the details of the model review because it's so incredibly important to get it right. But I do want to push back ever so gently, Simone, on the idea that this is to get around physical availability. But it's tricky and complicated, and that's why the slide that we showed on model review doesn't have all the details yet. But with that, I'll kick it to Jake, and then Scott, you'll be up next. And Alex, did you raise your hand again? Got it. We'll do that. All right.
Thanks. Jake Lenderking, Global Water. I just wanted to reiterate a couple of things that either have been said today or previously. Doug mentioned the importance of our ACC regulated utilities and how the department imputes conservation requirements. Happy to be part of a side dialogue or something to make sure we can make good conservation requirements happen. So I think that's important in how that's structured. Secondly, you mentioned, not having lakes and talking and thinking about recycled water use. I just want to reiterate, very important part of what we do. I think direct use of recycled water is going to be important for us now and forever. So, how that's carved out, even if it's explicit that, recycled water retention structures are allowed, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. All right, Scott.
Yes, it is. In the Pinell AMA, who's had a problem with physical availability for quite a few number of years now, had we had an equitable and enough volume mechanism to convert ag lands into physical availability for assured water supply for development, that process would have been well underway already. The only reason it hasn't been is because that process has not existed, even though many people would have taken advantage of it and gone forward with it. The surest way to create a great increase of physical availability for urban development in the Pinell AMA is for the extinguishment of irrigation grandfathered rights. It does not take a detailed study to understand that a very large water using segment, when it is reduced to a much larger water using segment, will create an enormous amount of physical availability that doesn't exist right now. In many ways, we do not have in the Pinell AMA a physical availability problem that is wet water. We have one that is a regulatory problem. We don't have the mechanism to convert IGFRs into assured water supply for the urban sector. What we have discussed here is a mechanism to begin this. And many aspects of the framework are unobjectionable. In fact, some of them are quite well thought out. However, primarily, when you take a situation of the eligibility of the IGFRs that will be able to be brought into this program, you are picking those IGFRs that more or less will have the higher water uses of those that are in the AMA. Makes sense. Those are the ones that you'd like to get converted. Those are the ones that make the most difference. However, you're taking IGFRs that might be anywhere from 4 to 6 acre feet per acre foot of, per acre of use. And you are using a conversion factor that is unworkable. You're putting a lot of effort and a lot of good thought into a good mechanism that I believe really will not be used very much at all, because your conversion factor is too extreme. Why is it necessary in this area of greater scarcity to work for something that is a 75% or larger reduction in water? Would 50% not be okay? Would getting a 50% reduction in the water that's used on various parcels of land, would that not be a marvelous water security measure for the Pinal AMA? Why do you shoot for 75? Why do you shoot for 80? Because when you do that, all you're doing is creating an elegant and well thought out program that I don't believe is really going to be used very much.
Well, I did love eloquent and well thought out. But thank you, Scott. Your point's well taken. Yes. Alex, and then Nick will get you a mic. Thanks.
I just wanted to respond to Simone's concerns about the long-term storage credits. And I was involved in the stakeholder groups last year, and we talked a lot about this. So I think that calling it a physical availability exemption credit is a misnomer, because I didn't see it that way. And I think, we wanted to develop something that would protect long-term storage credits, and worked with SRP and AMWA and DWR on this model review concept that would protect the long-term storage credits. And so essentially you're replacing the legacy groundwater pumping from the irrigation grandfathered rights is also, a risk to long-term storage credits. And so you're going to replace that with something that it's like a summary physical availability check. So you're going to take DWR's current model and you're going to run it through that and see in those cells, is it physically available? If physically available, does it meet the the requirements? And if it does, then you can move forward with that credit. You still have to meet all the other criteria in the Assured Water Supply Program. And I think that the parties that were involved discussing it last year were comfortable that that would protect long-term storage credits. So, I think the department in its slides says they're still working on the model review and evaluating it, but that was the purpose of it, was to kind of address some of those concerns.
Simone, I guess you can respond, and then we'll back to the back.
I appreciate that. I think this is a really important issue. So it's worth maybe kind of narrowing in on it a little bit. And I'm really hopeful that when we find out what the model review component of this is going to be, that maybe that will assuage all of our concerns. I was involved in a group evaluating the last year proposal, and there was a potential model review that we felt like we could get behind. What I understand has moved forward since then is I will just say less reassuring. So again, I don't know what the details are of what this model review is going to include, but if all we're doing is looking at one model cell, very, very small area, we're not looking at on an AMA scale, has all of the water in the aquifer, the groundwater, the long-term storage credits, all of the water underground on an AMA scale, which is what the 100-year assured water supply model protects. That's what protects those layers of the cake on an AMA scale. If this model review is looking at one cell in a model, so maybe a square mile, maybe, and all it's looking at is how much water is there and going down 1,000 feet, and is the water there for that well to pump, that's not protecting long-term storage credits, in my opinion. So again, it really depends on, well, what is this model review? And we don't know what it is yet, but I don't know that we're confident yet that the model review component has any impact on protecting on an AMA scale, all of the underground storage.
Thanks, Simone. Yes, in the back.
Arlington Canal Company out west. I agree with the gentleman up front there that if you stop pumping in my little valley there in Arlington, about 4,000 acres, if you stop pumping for farmland, put houses on it, you would be awash in water. And I don't understand your math going from, we use about 6.5 acre feet on our alfalfa every year. I don't understand your math. If we put it in houses, you're saying that someone's going to get credit for 1 acre feet. I don't want to sell any for houses, but what a point I'm trying to make is who came up with that kind of math to go from 7 acre feet to 1 acre foot? Where does the, maybe where does the other 5 or 6 acre feet go? If Buckeye does it, they will be waterlogged. A bunch of land on the south end will just be underwater, won't be farmable. That water is there, and if you quit farming with it, it's going to come up. And so how do you come up with a 7-to-1 ratio? I'm not mad at anybody. I went to school at Arlington Elementary, and my math is if I lay out 1,000 acres, that's 7,000 acre feet. And I don't think 1,000 acres of houses will use that much, but that's just my input. That and $2 won't buy you soda.
Yes, Simone. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I'm Simone Williams from Amwon. I'd just like to say that Warren Tenney was unable to be here, so tender an apology for him. Amwon submitted written comments, and I'd just like to add that we very much appreciate all the efforts that has gone into ADWR's development of a well-structured and effectively managed, a well-structured program that can be effectively managed to balance providing new water supplies with protecting groundwater. And we'd like to encourage ADWR to continue your thoughtful and deliberative approach to using analysis to guide the choices and decisions that are made about program components. And we very much look forward to seeing further fleshing out of the details of the program component. So thank you for your efforts so far, and we're looking forward to seeing and contributing to the process to refine the program.
Thank you, Simone. Nick, do we have anybody waiting online?
Not currently, no.
Okay. Anyone else here in the room? If not, what I'll say, we expected an outcome somewhat like this with additional comments, and we have taken careful notes, redundant careful notes. So we're gonna especially those comments that we haven't yet heard, and for those who have indicated they'll submit written comments, we appreciate that. We will make sure to upload those as well once we receive them, and we will carefully think through them along with the other comments that we've received. We've of course read them all, but maybe not spend as thoughtful a time as we would hope with each one of them just yet. So we will continue to work through those. And as issues start to arise, we expect that there may be a need for continued technical working groups to talk through some of the very specific things that have come up. We invite all of you to continue to reach out to us if you have specific thoughts or comments that you haven't indicated to us, or if you just want to talk about some of the things you've already talked about. But at this point, we're going to take some time to begin thinking through everything that you've shared with us, and we look forward to those additional comments. I know we're a little early. I'm okay giving you your time back if you are, but if there's any other comments that anyone here wants to make, the floor would be yours. All right, I see Dave and Scott. Anybody else? Well, it's short or long, you got.
Well, that's okay, but I'll get out
We're
of this.
here for you.
I just had a question to ask.
Lovely,
Do,
okay.
do we intend to have a working group meeting prior to the next general meeting?
Yeah, yes, well, I guess what I would say is I said yes to something that Natalie said off mic. Right now, we haven't scheduled a next technical meeting or general meeting. We're taking some time with the comments that we received. And so I think the way that I would most comfortably frame it is I expect that there's going to be some issues that we're going to need to work through that would probably be most beneficial to do in a technical working group style, but we haven't scheduled anything yet.
I would suggest it's a good idea.
Oh, thank you. Oh, lovely. All right, Dave, go ahead.
I apologize. I was wanting to ask, what is the basis for, at least in the Phoenix AMA, the 1 acre foot per acre limit?
Are you saying what's the reason for that
The
specific
basis
conversion rate?
for, is there some technical work that you've done that says 1 acre foot per acre is the number we're going to use in this program, as opposed to 1.5 or some other number?
Sure. And we've made the dashboard available online as well. But our analysis right now, as we've worked through the expected savings that we would see, also considering the degree of uncertainty that comes, especially thinking about the next 100 years, we feel that that is a safe assumption to make that using 1 acre foot in the Phoenix AMA, I should say, 1 acre foot per eligible acre, we can be confident in the amount of water savings that we would see.
So it's really tied to taking net groundwater used for agriculture versus 1 acre foot. And that savings is how you arrived at 1 acre foot as the number.
Yeah, that's right. The net groundwater use of both and trying to understand expected replenishment.
Well, you know that the 1 acre foot eventually, even though you have a slide where you can use extinguishment credits and groundwater allowances, those eventually go away.
That's right.
And then Laura gets to do all the replenishment. So
For her members, yeah.
it's all of it. And so then the net groundwater use is 0, not 1. So eventually, because you are replenishing all of that. But I would like the department to consider what that one gentleman mentioned early on in the meeting, is that take a look at what a municipal demand per acre is going to be like, as opposed to trying to look at the net groundwater savings. Because again, if you allocate a number that you feel is going to be a net groundwater use that's going to be beneficial to the AMA, anything is going to be beneficial, as we know. It may not be enough water for the municipal developer. I mean, for the municipality. That's the big concern in the Buckeye area, is it's just going to turn into a huge bedroom community of nothing but homes.
So
Everybody commuting on I-10, which is already a mess. So anyway, that's my concern about that. I think looking at it from the side of the developer, the municipality, what they're going to need will be important, I think.
thanks, Steve. And we definitely have done some analysis of existing service areas, looking at their current water uses across all uses, and have seen that there are a significant number of service areas that do use less than 1 acre foot per acre. The other thing that we are really pushing toward is that we're in an era of limits. And yes, there are areas that use more than 1 acre foot per acre right now, but we want to be pushing toward increased conservation, using lower water use for these areas over time to make sure that we're allowing additional uses on groundwater, and we need to make sure we're doing so in a responsible way and using as little of that groundwater as we can.
I'd be curious to see your data on municipalities that are using less than 1 acre foot per acre. I worked for SRP for many years. The municipal use within the entire SRP service area is about 1.7, 1.8 acre feet per acre. Of course, that includes a lot of different uses as well. So, and it's a very mature area that does not include the urban irrigation. That's just what's coming out of a municipal tap. So I'd be curious about the data you use to get to see this 1 acre foot or less.
I think we may have presented that at a previous meeting. We'll find a reference to that.
And I looked at the Kyle Center report, and now just for example, they took the city of Goodyear in their entire municipal area, which includes a lot of raw desert land in Rainbow Valley, and included that as if it was urban, but it's raw desert land. It's not using any water, so it can't be, that's not an apples to apples comparison. You just need to take the land that's been urbanized and the water use on that and do the acre foot per acre there, so.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else?
We do have one question online.
Oh, Rob, I see you online, Rob. Go ahead.
Can you? How about now?
Yes, we can hear you, Rob.
Okay, I raised my hand because I wanted to make a really super technical point. I to the earlier Scott's earlier point about we need another technical meeting. And I'm going to go back to the 1 acre thing just because I can't help myself. But let me start with the technical meeting. I do think that the mechanics of creating the credit and pledging the credit and moving it through the system, I don't think we've spent enough time on the mechanics of that. And I think we have just a lot of questions about, and maybe this is more for agricultural community, but at what point do you stop irrigate farming? At what point do you get the credit? At what point is the credit recognized by the designated provider? At what point can you pledge it as part of a certificate? I recognize the current proposal in the rules doesn't allow you to do that, but I don't think we've really walked through that process, exactly what it is. We have stated previously that the earlier you stop farming, the more water you're going to save, and so having a very narrow window within which to stop farming and to move into urban development makes very little sense to us. But anyway, I do think a technical meeting with municipal providers and the agricultural community in the room would be really helpful so that we understand exactly what steps need to be taken to create the credit, pledge the credit, utilize the credit. I want to go back to the 1 acre feet per acre. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I just think it's worth saying. We lose sight in this process of the fact that if we have a successful ag to urban process, what we are doing is we are displacing farmland with urban land, which means, number one, instead of the groundwater going to grow crops, which we're extremely supportive of, I don't mean to downplay agriculture, but it goes to houses and it generates effluent. Effluent really doesn't even play a role in the process today, but we know that urban development results in generation of effluent, which is a resource that can be used and reused. And that's not considered here. We also have this replenishment obligation. So we have groundwater pumping that occurs with replenishment. But we've also created a tax base in which there's a capability of paying for and addressing water resource issues. So if we have an analysis that shows that ag to urban doesn't work because it results in more groundwater being used, I would submit that analysis is simply not accurate. We've displaced a groundwater use that cannot replenish, that's not obligated to replenish, that doesn't generate effluent, with one that has a tax base that can solve water problems. 1 acre foot per acre, I agree with Dave's comments on that. I just don't think that's a real number. I think what it'll result in is lower density. And we have raised that question about density. It's really important that we be able to do higher density housing, and doing 1 acre foot per acre is not going to allow us to do that. So thank you for the process. Thank you for listening to us. I'm done.
Thank you, Rob. All right, folks, we really, another question, Scott. Oh, well, against my better judgment,
Yeah, thank you for your indulgence. Comment made from the front, question how we came upon a 1 acre foot conversion factor. And the several things were said, but one of them was said was the importance of looking at things over a 100-year period and how it affected things over a 100-year period. Well, I agree with you 100%. I think you're exactly right. In the Pinell AMA, there are a number of strong groundwater areas that can basically do what they're doing now in perpetuity. They'll never stop if they don't have a reason to. Now, the way I look at that, let's just use nice round figures for kicks. A very well-watered farm that is an alfalfa producer and other water-using crops that might use 6 acre foot per acre and turns in an annual water use of 6,000 acre feet. And after 100 years, that's 600,000 acre feet, because that's 100 years. If that was made 1.5 acre feet today, that would be 150,000 acre feet over 100 years for a net savings immediately of 350,000 acre feet when you look at it on 100 years. So the concept of finding the incentivation point to try to make those things happen is the largest way to save water and make water insecurity, which is becoming more prevalent in Arizona, a lesser thing immediately. The faster we incentivize it, the better we are. Programs that don't incentivize it don't do much for us.
Understood. I take it then that you want a higher conversion rate is I think what you're driving at. Got it. I'll note it. Yeah. Thank you, Scott. All right. Folks, and forgive sometimes my levity. It is my style, but I do want to communicate how appreciative we have been for the time that you've taken, especially and maybe mostly with those folks who have come to us with concerns about how we're approaching this program with incredibly helpful information at times. So we do want to extend that, appreciate all those folks who feel like we're on the right track. Your comments were greatly appreciated. And I do want to point out that we're not done yet. So these conversations will continue. We'll take your points. We will look forward to the additional written comments we'll receive. And thank you all for coming.